This desk is such a funny shape. Like, how do you go and say, I'm going to do 2 kidney shapes in the top of the desk?
I've never actually thought about this before.
I've never either.
Yeah. You're coming in with fresh eyes here.
You know what I'm saying? I get it. I get why.
It's shaped like a udder or a
teardrop?
A teardrop.
A teardrop
Yeah.
is probably more appropriate.
This is where we feel really sad.
Yeah.
This is where we get sad.
Yeah. This is the crying place.
It's time for Sound Politics.
Welcome to Sound Politics. I'm Scott Greenstone.
And I'm Cat Smith, in for Libby Dankman.
And this week, the discourse has gotten really heated.
Oh, yeah.
About, I think, progressive politics. I mean, it's not just this week. It's been building. This discourse about progressive politics versus business growth, and whether Seattle and Washington's politics are growing hostile to business.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that the discourse has gotten heated. It is piping hot. But then while the temperature has, as you said, been going up for years as Democrats passed more progressive taxes, I think it really started to boil last November when then Mayor-elect Katie Wilson showed up on the picket line of a Starbucks workers' strike.
Right.
I am not buying Starbucks, and you should not either.
Hot, yes, hot, piping hot. Tivana tea. I don't know. Seattle's mayor-to-be going after arguably one of its 2 most recognizable global businesses is a big deal. I think it got maybe even hotter, maybe started bubbling over, if we're going to keep going with this metaphor, with the passage of the millionaire's tax down in Olympia in March. The day after the tax passed the legislature, billionaire ex-CEO of Starbucks, Howard Schultz, announced he was moving to even hotter climes, Miami specifically. And then the burn. A few weeks ago at a Seattle U talk, Mayor Katie Wilson said, if billionaires want to leave Seattle,
like, bye. So that all brings us up to this week when Howard Schultz served up a hot take, hot as fresh Pike Place roast.
We put so many Starbucks references.
We're serving up a lot.
Yeah.
So he served up this hot take in the Wall Street Journal, an op-ed. This is, I would say this is the first really blistering attack on Seattle and Washington state leadership that we've seen from a billionaire like Schultz.
Like a local billionaire.
Yeah, one of our homegrown billionaires. And the headline of his op-ed was, Seattle turns hostile to the great businesses it made. And in it, he says Mayor Katie Wilson, quote, vilifies employers even while she continues to rely on them for revenue. And he also says that state-level Democrats are taxing instead of doing, quote, reform and performance management. And he says all these things together have created a business climate that's driving out companies like the one he used to run, Starbucks.
And we should have probably mentioned in that back and forth that, pretty soon after Schultz said he was moving, Starbucks said, the company said that it will open new headquarters in Tennessee and move 2,000 jobs there.
Yeah, that was a big deal. But there's a twist here to this story about Schultz and the business climate. Schultz says he's not anti-tax, right? He does say the tax system is broken and needs fixing. He calls out the state's regressive tax code, which he says relies too heavily on sales taxes. And he rightly points out that the sales taxes in Seattle are over 10%. Yeah. So here's the money quote from Schultz that I pulled out for us. Quote, Washington once embodied the future of the U.S. economy, and it can again. But the current government needs to learn that future entrepreneurs won't be attracted by ineffective public systems, especially when joined with policy and political rhetoric that demonizes businesses, unquote.
I want to dive deep into that idea on today's show. Schultz is saying something a lot of critics, even some Democrats are saying, right? Washington and Seattle are taxing too much, too quickly, and could destroy the things that have made Washington's economy world class. The international mega corporations, Starbucks, Microsoft, Amazon, Costco, born here, not all in Seattle itself, but around.
And, we should mention, too, that Schultz isn't exactly a popular figure here. Plenty of voters in this area think, billionaires are bad. And people also are still mad at Schultz.
At him specifically, yeah.
Specifically for selling the Supersonics.
Talked about this on the show, yeah.
Yes, and leaving the city without an NBA team. So not a beloved figure necessarily.
We were not looking to have Schultz call in from his Miami penthouse. We actually wanted to talk to a former elected Democrat former high-level state bureaucrat, a guy who's called to tax the rich, but now represents local and big business. Hopefully, he can help us sort through these big feelings we've been talking about. That's after the break.
And we're back with Sound Politics. I'm Kat Smith.
And I'm Scott Greenstone, and we are joined by Joe Nguyen, former Seattle state senator, former Bernie Sanders delegate.
That's right.
What year?
So it was Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. So this was the first
2016 Bernie Sanders, 2020 Elizabeth Warren?
2020. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Joe, you've also helped lead the charge to tax wealthy Washingtonians more. And so a lot of heads turned when earlier this year you took the job of president and CEO of Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce, the biggest lobbying group for businesses in the region with 2,500 members of all sizes, from Amazon and Starbucks to mom and pop shops. A Seattle Times headline from a little over a week ago. This is a good one. Seattle business lobby hires leftist firebrand who speaks the mayor's language.
I thought that was interesting. Croman is great. Great
David
headline.
Croman. We've had him on the show before. Shout out, David.
Right.
Joe, before you were a lawmaker, before all of this, you worked for Microsoft and Expedia, and between being a lawmaker and now, you ran Governor Ferguson's Department of Commerce. So I think you have almost every perspective we're looking for.
Yeah, you are the perfect guest
Except-
for this moment.
Except you're
It's a
not
high bar.
Except you're not a billionaire.
Oh.
No, not a billionaire. I don't think that's in my cards. Public sector is not the most lucrative.
Well, thanks for joining us anyway. Let's start with a stranger piece you wrote in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to shift from Howard Schultz to a piece you wrote.
Let's do it.
That I am going to actually ask our producer to bleep part of.
Oh, I do swear a lot. Yes, that is a factual statement.
Well, you swore in this piece you were pushing for the state's capital gains tax. It was in The Stranger. Here's the quote. If you are in the 0.01% of people who would be impacted by this legislation, and by this legislation, the capital gains tax you worked to pass, congratulations. You're one of the wealthiest people ever to live in the history of humanity. Thank you for reading this article, but it's time to pay your fair share of taxes.
I thought you were going to bleep it, no?
We'll do it in
we'll
post.
bleep it.
Oh, okay. Can I swear too?
We'll bleep it if you do. We'll bleep it if you do. Do you feel the same way, bleeps and all, about taxing the rich more?
Well, here, so I think part of that conversation, first off, is we did it. We ended up passing cap gains. We also passed progressive REIT. There was a number of payroll options that passed as well. And I think part of the fallacy that I saw while there was passing the tax was the goal, not the outcome, right? So from my perspective, it wasn't that I wrote that, because if you read the rest of the article, it was about all the great needs that we had. And during that time, it was during the pandemic, we thought that we were staring down an austerity budget. So from my perspective, since 2019, when I got in till now, the budget was initially about $54 billion. Now it's closer to $80 billion, so it's increased almost 50%. The biggest thing for me is, what are the outcomes that we are getting as residents of Washington State, as residents of Seattle? And I think increasingly, it is very much a cost burden right now in this region for a whole host of factors. We don't have to debate it right now. But do we see the value that tax burden brings? And the answer for a lot of folks is not quite. So I think even Howard Schultz, as you mentioned, talked about how he's not anti-tax, but you have to have the outcomes associated with it to build an ecosystem that is successful. So that's where that rub kind of lies.
So one of the things that I was hoping to talk to you about today is, sort of this road that you've been on to the position that you're in now. I wanted to know what you saw when you were working in government that's kind of pushed you to working with this organization that has not always been on the same, aligned with, tax the rich policies, for example.
You know, what's funny is it's more aligned than you would think. The thing that I thought when I first came in was, is it us versus them? It was very much adversarial. I think part of why I was tapped to be the head of the Department of Commerce by Governor Ferguson and now at the Chamber of Commerce is I did a couple of things that I thought was kind of common sense, but was unique in that space. I talked to folks who disagreed with me. And I talked to folks who were impacted by some of the policies that we put in place. And oftentimes you find resolution that was actually amicable. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the policies in Washington State, 96% of them are actually bipartisan. Not that they have to be, but they're bipartisan.
Mm-hmm. Like Republicans and Democrats passed them together.
Yeah. So if you look at most of the things that matter for us when it comes to housing, when it comes to homelessness and affordability, we actually agree on a lot. So the fact that there are a lot of folks who spend a lot of time on things that we don't agree on, it's a fact of nature that happens. But I just focus on the things where we actually agreed upon and wanted to make sure that we were actually building a better community for our region and for our residents. And that's that rubbed.
I thought I heard something in there when you were talking about how, you don't necessarily want the tax to be the goal.
That's right.
You want this. So I felt like you were sort of bumping up against something, that you saw something in government where the tax was the point.
The tax was the point. To be honest with you, I mean, from my perspective, given the dynamics in the legislature, it wasn't that hard to pass progressive revenue. We did it. It was harder to build housing. It was harder to have more public safety. It's harder to bring down affordability issues. It was harder to fund our schools. So my perspective largely was, look, we have a lot of folks who are playing in that space. I think it's detrimental to our economy long term. One of the things that I made the realization of while I was there is if you look at the city of Seattle, King County, or even the state, the vast majority of the revenue from the budget in Seattle is from business taxes specifically. So, and not just that, but because it was quote unquote progressive, a very small percentage of businesses actually pay the taxes. So in 2019, almost 100% of the budget increase in the city of Seattle from 2019 until now is largely through the payroll tax, which is mostly
Amazon,
one company, right? So my point being is that, look, we are a deeply progressive region with deeply progressive values. And that ensures that we have to have a civic partnership with the business community because we need both in order for us to be successful.
I want to talk, if we can, just to start to zero in more on Seattle. I think this is a bit of a tenuous time in our local economy. Inflation is up, and Washington State's is higher than we feel it more than much of the rest of the country.
Yeah.
A third of downtown Seattle offices are vacant. Unemployment in Seattle is at 5% due to layoffs in the tech sector, and hiring across the state is slowing too. Based on what you've experienced in your role so far, Joe, do you think Seattle is a bad place to do business right now?
No, I think Seattle is a fantastic place to do business. And in fact, we have one of the highest GDPs per capita in all of the United States behind Silicon Valley. However, the caveat that I have is it is not a guarantee that that happens going forward. And there are certainly market dynamics. A lot of it is unnecessary in terms of the rhetoric towards the business community that really makes it difficult for businesses to be here. Because if you think about, businesses, really what they need is stability and clarity in their future, right? So even beyond the policies themselves, if you're seeing rhetoric from elected officials towards the business community that basically says, hey, we don't really like you, it's not that different from being in your friend group. If you got like a friend that's like, hey, you kind of suck, we don't like you, you're not going to hang out with them, right? So I think part of it too is we have to realize that our history is certainly intertwined. If not for Boeing, if not for Amazon, if not for Microsoft, if not for Starbucks, we would not have the great communities that we have now.
You sounds like you're saying to me, Mayor Wilson, stop talking like you don't like, Starbucks or whatever.
Well, what's interesting is last week she had that housing press conference around the tiny home shelters. And if you look at the main, if not only, providers of additional resources beyond the city, it was the business community.
It's that private partnership.
Exactly, right? And then I actually just came from the Mary's Place Luncheon. They do great work. Mary's Place, if you don't know, is an organization that serves youth and families that are experiencing homelessness, that are unhoused. The major benefactor, the major sponsor of them, Amazon. Second, Starbucks, Microsoft, Dick's Drive-Ins, right? So a lot of the things that we really appreciate and value in this community, we need to have that civic engagement.
Would you encourage her to bring that up more, or does she talk about it enough?
So what I'll just say, and I'll give her credit and her team credit, Brian as well, the deputy mayor, is that they've been very much engaged with the business community. We've had a number of good, positive conversations with them. There certainly is an effort there to build a better relationship. I give her a little bit of grace as a formerly elected official. You just read some of the stuff that I wrote when I was, 8 months in, right? So I would be a hypocrite if I were to say, hey, stop with the tone, right? But I do think that as a role of a mayor in the executive space, especially at this time, your words do matter. And I think she's learning that. And I think she's reacting to that as well. And, it's one of those things where Seattle politics is not for the faint of heart. This is a very unique place to do public sector work. And I do hope that we can give her the support and partnership that is required to be able to make this region successful.
Do you hear concerns from your members specifically about the new millionaires tax? I mean, it hasn't gone into effect yet, but is that a concern among businesses in Seattle, the millionaires tax specifically?
Our members were split. So the Seattle Metro Chamber actually did not take a position on that. Do I hear concerns? Yes. Do I understand the frustrations and fear of why that exists? Yes. But I think we're also, and that's kind of, that comment you made about that's interesting. That was actually my response too, in the sense of when I first started working in partnership with the chamber as an elected official, I had the impression of in 2019 and 2020 when they were more engaged politically, it was not a positive impression. But the more that I worked with the members of the chamber, with chamber staff, chamber leadership, I saw that our values are actually very much aligned. The Seattle Metro Chamber is probably the most progressive chamber in probably the United States in terms of major metropolitans. So you'll see that the membership base is very thoughtful and pragmatic about how we engage politically now, and also what that means for, say, for instance, the budget. So I hear a lot of concerns, but I also think that the members really understand that this is a region that requires resources to be successful, and that's what really they're worried about.
Well, Scott and I think because we work in the news and we read a lot of, we do a lot of doom scrolling, I'll say. And so we hear a lot about companies downsizing or moving out of Seattle anecdotally. Starbucks, their new HQ in Tennessee, Amazon moving jobs to Bellevue, Microsoft and Facebook cutting staff left and right. But the region is still a hub for tech work. Right. I think there's something like 400 AI companies or startups in the Seattle area. It's still a huge tech hub, but it can be hard to parse through all these headlines and understand whether the city's business sector is growing or shrinking. So I'm curious, what are you seeing? Are more businesses opening than closing in Seattle, or are we witnessing a shriveling or a contraction, do you think, of the business sector overall?
Yeah, it depends on how you look at it. Actually, if you look at it even state level, the number of, say, for instance, LLCs that are created has actually grown. However, if you look at the ones that stay around for longer than 2 to 3 years, it declines. Meaning a lot of folks do want to be here and they want to start their businesses here. Being able to do so is a different story. And then even to your point, and that's why I actually am very bullish around Seattle, is a lot of the hard things to make a city viable for progress and innovation and economic growth, we actually have it. We have a strong workforce. We have great research institutions like Wazoo and UW. We have infrastructure like the ports. We have a history and legacy around advanced manufacturing technology. So a lot of the hard things communities need to be successful, we already have. So the things that are causing a lot of tension now is really that dynamic between the political class and the business class. And what I found to be interesting, coming from a little bit of both, is that there's a fundamental disconnect between how the business community engages the political community and vice versa. I would say that there's really a not good coordination that's happening right now. And that's probably why, I think the chamber leadership asked for me to join, and why I'm so thankful to be there is because I'm really trying to play a very unique role in a unique moment in time for this region that I think can be a very pivotal moment for the next few decades.
To kind of be that bridge between the political class and the business class.
That's right.
Seattle Metro Chamber has not been as involved recently in local politics. I think during last year's mayoral election, the political action committee that you all have didn't endorse a candidate. But in the past, you have supported challengers to socialist city council member Shama Sawant, or, backing an alternative to the social housing tax that passed, I believe, last year, and tending to back more sort of middle of the road candidates for Seattle. Mayor Wilson is a self-declared socialist. I think particularly a Marxist, she said.
I heard that too.
On a different show. Yeah. And I kind of wonder, how, as someone in her camp, or you were in her camp, or you kind of were adjacent to her camp, how do you think about that?
It's funny. I had a bill. When I first was in office, it became pretty clear quickly that new members don't have that much power. What I did have was a pen. So I drafted all these bills for this utopia of what I believe Washington State could be, and a guaranteed basic income was one. And I was talking to somebody about the bill, and I was looking up the bill to find the bill number. And the first article that came up about the bill was one that Katie Wilson wrote, I think for Cascade PBS or Crosscut at that time.
Oh, yeah.
So there were a number of times we actually worked together on some of the policy discussions as we were kind of evangelizing some of this work, transit being obviously a big one as well. So it's been great to be able to see kind of her role historically within the advocacy community, and then seeing kind of how she's shifting into the political community and trying to help where we can possibly as well. But I will say it's a different dynamic. Going from an advocacy world to an executive office is very, very different, because ultimately you have to make a decision. And as you know, in Seattle politics, there is no easy decision, right? Like there is not one. And you have to have the ability to kind of transcend. And you're seeing her do some of that stuff, whether it's CCTVs, whether it's encampments.
That's the cameras.
That's
that
right.
She kind of made people think that she was going to shut off, but she decided to
not
kind
to
of take a more,
and not move forward. But I think that's kind of my perspective with her is that it's great to see somebody who cares, I think, about this region, about this city. It is a shift like in a mental space, but also in kind of how you operate space as well.
While she figures out how to make that shift, I mean, she has ruffled some feathers in the business community. Do you think it's fair to say that there is animosity between the mayor and the business community right now?
I think life is all about expectations. If you look at a stock price, if your company was expected to make a boatload of money and you made a little bit less money than expected, your stock price goes down. If your company was expected to make or to lose money, but you made a little bit of money, your stock price goes up. It's interesting. I would actually argue that the business community is probably one of our closest allies right now, right?
Wow.
When you look at, and this is just purely, as you guys all follow politics, I think there's a lot of folks in her base that maybe are upset because she hasn't been able to deliver just yet, which, to be fair, it's been 4 months. I think
or she's taken stances that they do not agree with.
That's right.
Yeah, we've been talking about that.
Yeah, so I think my point being is that the business community here is looking for long-term durability when it comes to not just the economic conditions to make this region successful, but we also understand that regardless of if we agree or not, we're going to have to work together. And the fact that she's shown up to a lot of our events, the fact that she's shown up to the Downtown Seattle Association, it had thoughtful comments about taxation and the business climate, shows that she's interested and she's eager to learn. And I think that by itself has been a very heartwarming kind of experience for a lot of people in the business community where they thought that she was going to come in fire and brimstone, and she hasn't. She's come in with open arms and having some great conversations.
It's a good point that the clip we played went all over the country on Fox News.
I saw it on Fox.
Yeah, I saw it on Fox.
I don't generally follow Fox, but I just saw it on my feed.
The Fox News TV sits right over my desk, so I see it all the time.
Fun.
But those other comments don't get as much play. The one you mentioned when she came to the state of downtown and said, like, I do understand that there is a mismatch between Seattle's taxes and Bellevue's, and that could encourage businesses to hop to Bellevue. I understand that's the reality.
Yeah.
We started this conversation with Howard Schultz's op-ed, so let's end it maybe with Howard Schultz's op-ed. We've been talking about the things that he brings up.
The themes, yeah.
But specifically, I want to pick your brain about this. He says that Seattle and the state of Washington more broadly put too much emphasis on taxing big businesses and the wealthy. You've brought that up too. He also says that the tax code relies too heavily on sales taxes, which is also
absolutely
common.
right. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you agree with that. Yeah. He doesn't propose anything concrete that could be done to actually fix the tax code, and I wonder if you and your members or just you as a person think that something could be done. When you talk about the sales tax, do you think that should be lowered? Could that help with the cost of living crisis we have?
One of the things that we used to do as I was a budget writer for Washington State is we always looked around and said, whatever we're doing, we don't want to be at the very top. We definitely don't want to be the top, if not more than the top. And almost immediately after I left, all the things that got dialed up, we were like way higher on estate tax, way higher on digital sales tax, and all that stuff as well. So I think he's absolutely right in the sense that politically it's easy to say you want to tax the rich. The hard part is that when you have high rates on a very narrow base, in this case, payroll tax is largely 5 companies and really it's just one. Even if they don't move, but if they just shift a little bit, that has major implications on the budget. And that's why oftentimes you'll hear political leaders say, oh, they're not going to move, it's totally fine. Even if you're right 99.9% of the times, even if 0.01% do move, your budget is even in a worse position. So part of why I think that there is a deficit is that we aren't actually growing the revenue in a way that is more sustainable. That's one. When you look at the longevity and the durability of the budget, generally speaking, one of the most important ways to look at it is low rates, broad-based, with very few exceptions.
So a lot of people paying
paying very little taxes with very little exceptions. That is the most stable way to do it. not the most politically viable way, but the most stable way of doing it.
Because a lot of people do not want to pay taxes or more taxes.
You know, Seattle, actually, we pass every single levy. So I think it's a little bit of a story. But my point, I guess, in this conversation is that it is easy. It's interesting to me, and this is kind of the discourse that happens, is that everybody says that Washington State's tax code is regressive, and it's based off of an ITEP study. And the core premise of that is it's regressive because we have business taxes and sales taxes and things like that then get passed through. And then so if you agree that it's regressive, we just made it technically more regressive, which, again, I was part of that conversation as well. So that's incumbent upon me. But really, we're doing it because we want better outcomes for our communities. That's the problem. And in this case, there are certainly ways for us to have more thoughtful engagements than just saying the rich are bad. Because at the end of the day, even if you want to tax the rich, you need rich people to tax, right? And if you want to support workers, you need to have jobs for them to work in. I think that's the conversation that needs to be had.
I wasn't going to ask this question, but we're at the end of our. Can I?
Yeah, I'm here. I can't go anywhere now.
Well,
the door's locked.
We locked the door. This is like a rude question, I guess, that I want to end with, because some people will listen to this interview and think to themselves, well, Joe was this, what did Seattle Times call you, a lefty firebrand or whatever, and he's sold out, and now the businesses are paying him money to, spread their propaganda. What would you say to that listener who thinks, I don't know if I can trust this guy anymore because, now he's working for the man?
Yeah, no, first off, thank you, because I think that civic engagement is important. I'm so thankful to have a region and a city that cares so deeply about this place and this economy and this community that we are able to have that type of conversation. As somebody who was the son of refugees, as somebody who came here because of economic prosperity, right? When you look at a lot of the immigrant communities that are here, oftentimes their first ability to engage in the community is a small business. Ours was a billiards hall in White Center. So
that was your family, your parents?
That's right. So my parents had a billiards hall in White Center. So just the same way that I benefited from public schools, I benefited from public transportation, I benefited from public institutions. We also benefited from jobs as well. Being progressive in our values is not diametrically opposed for economic opportunities. In fact, if you look at the history of the United States, oftentimes when there was harm created against communities, when there was exclusion happening, it ended up being economic tools that were used, whether it's redlining, whether it's lending practices, whether it was excluding people from certain places. So for me, I think economic opportunity is one of the biggest tools that we can have to actually alleviate some of the social justice issues that we face today too. So it's great that we can have that type of conversation. From my perspective, a lot of the people here are really struggling with affordability, with housing, dealing with, how do we address homelessness and public safety. There is no math that we can do this just by raising taxes. It simply does not exist, right? So for us to be able to successfully achieve our goals as a progressive region with our values, we need to have strong economic opportunities for all of us. So I'm happy to be that voice that can bridge that gap. I was a former legislator. I was a very vocal legislator, so you can imagine the emails that I got. So I'm not at all daunted by tough conversations by any means. But at the end of the day, my job is to create better outcomes for our communities. As somebody who was born here, raised here, my family's here, our goal is to make sure that we have a prosperous economy for everybody.
Joe Nguyen is CEO of the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for Sound Politics today. I'm Kat Smith. Our producer is Hans Anderson.
And I'm Scott Greenstone. And our editor is you, Kat Smith.
Me again. This show is only possible because of your support. You can make a donation at kuow.org/politics.
And we will see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.